Hello everyone, welcome back to the Velvet Murmurs.
Welcome to Velvet Murmurs, where every whisper hides a secret. I'm so glad you've joined us for today's mystery. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from mystery lovers all around the world. Hercule Poirot and the Final Encore. Chapter 1. Curtain Call. The clatter of hooves had long vanished from Fifth Avenue, yet a certain rhythm remained, a restless beat beneath the city's skin. On this crisp October afternoon in 1948, New York shimmered with promise and secrets alike. And nestled between a modernist hotel and a Gothic cathedral stood the Grand Orpheum Theatre, a relic of velvet curtains, brass sconces, and fading grandeur. Tonight it would host one final performance from the legendary Margot Lyle. Hercule Poirot, seated primly in a town car provided by his host, tilted his head with appreciation as the theatre's marquee came into view. The final encore, Margot Lyle in Antigone's Lament. The Belgian detective adjusted the cuffs of his dove-grey suit and glanced at his gold pocket watch. 5 minutes early, naturellement, he murmured with satisfaction. He despised lateness with the same fervour others reserved for criminality. As the car door was opened for him by a crisply dressed attendant, Poirot stepped out, umbrella in hand, moustache immaculately waxed, eyes sharp and observant beneath his bowler hat. Andrew Wexley, financier, art collector, and theatre patron, stood waiting just beneath the portico, his tall frame cloaked in a camel overcoat. "Poirot, old friend." Wexley extended a hand. "Still punctual as the tides, eh?" "My dear Wexley," Poirot replied with a slight bow, "to arrive with precision is to honour the moment." He glanced up at the building. "And this is a moment, no? The last performance of the great Margot Lyle." Wexley nodded, but his eyes clouded. "If she makes it to curtain, she's been difficult lately. Paranoid, erratic. I'm told she fired her assistant for watering her ferns incorrectly." "Ah," Poirot smiled thinly. "The soul artistique, it bruises easily." Inside, the theatre buzzed with rehearsals. Technicians adjusted lights from ladders above the stage. A dressmaker bustled past with a hem in her mouth. Poirot trailed Wexley through the narrow corridors, past doors marked props, stage right, and private. "She's in her dressing room. You'll meet her in a moment," Wexley said. "But first, let me introduce a few key people. You'll find the dynamic rather combustible." First came Victor Dane, the charismatic director, with a silver streak through his black hair and a cigarette clamped between his fingers. "Wexley, and you must be Monsieur Poirot?" Victor said, offering a dramatic bow. "Honoured, though I confess the presence of a famous detective before opening night gives one a touch of stage fright." "Non, non," Poirot said with a small chuckle. "I am here to observe drama, not crime." "Let's hope it stays that way," Victor muttered, half to himself. In the wings, Gwen Blake, Margot's understudy, watched rehearsal nervously. She was pale, with a nervous twitch in her left hand. "She's not well," Gwen whispered to Wexley when introduced to Poirot. "Miss Lyle, she's been saying things." "What sort of things?" Poirot asked gently. "About being watched, about being replaced. She thinks someone's trying to steal her final beau." Across the stage stood Felix Stroud, Margot's ex-husband and producer of the play. Balding and cynical, he waved them over. "She won't rehearse with the cast," he barked. "She keeps the door locked and throws tantrums about lighting." "She always had a flair for solitude," Wexley said. Poirot nodded politely, but his ears caught a more interesting snippet nearby. An argument drifting through a half-closed door. A young man's voice, strained. "You owe me the truth. You think just because you're famous, you can ignore your past?" Wexley noticed Poirot's glance. "Ah, yes, that would be Julian, Margot's son. She rarely acknowledged him in public. They're estranged, and rightly so." And yet he is here? Tonight is more than a performance. It's a reckoning for her, I think. Just then, the lights dimmed. A rehearsal pause. From a corridor to their left, a girl emerged with striking posture and cool detachment. Clara Wexley, Andrew's daughter. She offered a nod to Poirot and turned away just as quickly. She shadowed Margot for years, Andrew whispered. Worships her. Though I wonder if even idols can stand such close attention. They finally approached Margot's dressing room. The star's name shimmered in gold script on the door. Wexley knocked once. A raspy voice responded, I don't want interruptions unless the theatre is burning down. She's not fond of guests, Wexley murmured. Perhaps we try again later. Poirot studied the door a moment longer. Fresh scratches marred the lock plate. A faint scent of roses and powder drifted from underneath. Très bien, he said. Let the diva rest. I shall watch from the audience instead. That evening, the seats of the Grand Orpheum filled with New York's finest. The orchestra tuned, the curtain quivered. But the play did not begin. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Whispers replaced applause. Suddenly a stagehand stumbled forward and whispered frantically into Felix Stroud's ear. Felix turned white. He hurried backstage, followed quickly by Wexley and Poirot. Moments later, the truth struck the theatre like a bolt of lightning. Margot Lyle had been found dead inside her locked dressing room. Alone. Slumped before her mirror. Her prized emerald ring gone. A tube of lipstick in one hand. And scrawled across the glass in deep crimson. All the world's a stage. Chapter 2, A Whisper in Red. The heavy silence that had fallen over the Grand Orpheum was broken only by the distant hum of the orchestra tuning down, unaware that their leading lady would never take the stage again. In the narrow, dim hallway behind the stage, Hercule Poirot stood beside the dressing-room door, which now hung open like a broken promise. The room inside was dimly lit, tinged with the scent of rose powder, cold cream, and something metallic beneath it. Margot Lyle sat before her mirror, slumped slightly in the high-backed velvet chair. Her face was tilted to one side, as if caught in thought mid-sentence. One hand rested loosely in her lap, the other held a crushed lipstick tube. The color, deep crimson, matched the words smeared across the mirror. All the world's a stage, but the quote was incomplete. It ended in a hasty, downward smear. Poirot took one quiet step forward and gestured to the two officers who had arrived moments earlier. Gentlemen, you will be so kind as to allow me a moment before anything is disturbed? Detective James Hardwick, a thick-set New York cop with sleeves rolled to his elbows, looked Poirot up and down. And you are? Poirot, Hercule Poirot, he said calmly. A guest of Mr. Wexley, and perhaps now of interest to you. Hardwick hesitated, then nodded. Keep it clean. Poirot stepped carefully into the room, scanning every surface with exacting precision. The vanity was cluttered with perfume bottles, brushes, and a half-finished champagne flute. A clock, once perched beside a framed black-and-white photograph of a younger Margot, now lay shattered on the floor. The clock, Poirot murmured, crouching slightly. Smashed, not dropped. See, Inspector, the crack angles outward, not downward. It was struck, not knocked. Deliberately broken? Hardwick asked. Poirot nodded. To suggest a time, perhaps? Or to confuse it? He tilted the timepiece gently. Its hands were frozen at 6:42. Poirot turned his gaze to the mirror. The message smeared in lipstick caught his eye again. All the world's a stage, but no mention of the players, he whispered. A poetic suicide note. It felt wrong, too composed, too theatrical. and Margot, according to everyone, was far too proud for such an exit. Hardwick pulled a small notebook from his breast pocket. No forced entry. Door was locked from the inside. Key was still in the lock. Window shut. Only the dresser had access. Says he left her tea at 5:30 and didn't see her after. Poirot tapped the chair lightly. This is no suicide, mon ami. Not by my little grey cells. Hardwick frowned. You think she was murdered? Poirot straightened and turned slowly toward the doorway. I think this scene was staged, and poorly. In the adjacent hallway, the others had gathered. Whispers and pale faces framed in flickering wall sconces. Felix Stroud lit a cigarette with trembling fingers. I knew it! She was losing it! Said someone was watching her, that she'd seen a face in her mirror. Utter nonsense! Don't, said Gwen, her voice shaking. She was frightened. She kept the door locked all day. Did anyone else see her alive after 5:30? Poirot asked. I did, Clara Wexley said quietly. She stepped forward, arms crossed over her emerald coat. I brought her a scarf she left in the costume room. She looked tired, but calm. It was around 6:15. The emerald ring was still on her finger. The ring is now missing, Poirot observed. Clara blinked. She adored that ring. She wore it every night, always on her right hand. And now it is gone, Poirot said softly. So a locked room, a missing emerald, a broken clock, and a cryptic message. Curious, no? Julian, Margot's estranged son, stood apart from the group, his jaw tight. Maybe she wanted to make a statement. Everything she did was for show. Poirot turned to him. And when did you last speak to your mother, monsieur? Julian met his gaze. We argued this morning. She said I was a mistake she regretted. His lip curled. I came back this evening to demand answers. She wasn't in her dressing room, or so I thought. Maybe she was hiding. Felix snorted. More like she was ignoring you. Poirot turned to Detective Hardwick. You have searched the room? We're bagging items now, Hardwick replied. Nothing obvious yet. Do look closely, Poirot said. And note, the mirror. Margot was right-handed, yet the writing, see the strokes, was written with the left. You sure? Certain. Hardwick scratched his head. So she didn't write the message herself? Either she was under extreme duress, or someone wrote it for her. Later that evening, Poirot stood alone beneath the golden dome of the Grand Orpheum's upper balcony, gazing down at the empty seats. Wexley approached quietly. You don't believe she took her own life, he said. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. Non, mon ami. It was too neat, and yet full of contradiction. You see, the lipstick? It had barely any wear, as if used only once. The glass of champagne, untouched. The scent of roses and powder too strong, meant to distract. It is a performance. Wexley frowned. But for whose benefit? Poirot's eyes narrowed. That, monsieur, is what I intend to find out. He turned toward the darkened stage. Tonight, there was to be one final performance, he said softly. But it seems the real drama is only beginning. Chapter 3. The Double Life of Margot Lyle. It was shortly after dawn the next morning when Poirot returned to the Grand Orpheum. The city outside buzzed with Saturday life, oblivious to the tragedy that had played out behind the velvet curtains just hours before. The theatre, by contrast, was eerily silent, its seats empty, its stage cold. Poirot made his way directly to Margot Lyle's dressing room, now sealed with police tape and guarded by an officer who recognized him with a reluctant nod. Inside, nothing had been moved at Poirot's insistence. He wanted everything exactly as it had been. He stood before the mirror again, considering the broken sentence, the smeared lipstick, the shattered clock. All the world's a stage. But what was the act Margot had been performing in her final days? His eyes turned toward the dressing table. Beside the half-used powder compact lay a binder, a prop script for Antigone's lament, with Margot's name penciled on the front in graceful, looping strokes. Poirot flipped it open. Tucked between the pages was something curious, a folded sheet of fine paper, the watermark unmistakably French. The text, written in a bold, elegant hand, was not part of any play. It read, "Names have power. If they wish to forget what they did, let them, but I will not go quietly. M.L." Poirot's brow furrowed. Not a diary entry, not a script, a declaration. He turned the page over. There was more, a list of initials, V.D., F.S., J.L., A.W., and next to each a single word, lies, debt, abandonment, control. Poirot folded the note carefully and slid it into his pocket. Très intéressant. Later that morning, he summoned the key suspects one by one, choosing the Grand Orpheum's empty green room as his chamber of interrogation. The velvet armchairs and gilt-framed posters of past productions gave the space a false sense of warmth. Poirot preferred it that way. Discomfort hid the truth. First came Victor Dane, the director. He lounged carelessly, lighting a cigarette and blowing smoke toward the ceiling. "She was unraveling," Victor said. "Brilliant actress, but paranoid. She told me someone had been through her private papers, claimed her understudy was stealing lines." "And was she?" Poirot asked. Victor shrugged. "Wouldn't be the first time. Margot had a way of creating enemies even while being adored. Drama followed her." Poirot tapped his fingers on the armrest. "She was writing something, oui? A memoir, perhaps?" Victor paused. "Where did you hear that?" Poirot gave a modest smile. "From the pages she left behind. You were among the names, Monsieur Dane." Victor's lips thinned. "She threatened to publish a tell-all book, said she'd ruin those who betrayed her, but she wouldn't really do it. She loved attention, not lawsuits." "But perhaps others did not share your optimism." Victor's jaw clenched. "If you're implying I killed her." "No, monsieur," Poirot interrupted gently. "I am merely observing how uncomfortable truth can be when shared in ink." Next came Felix Stroud, her ex-husband and producer. He sat stiffly, arms crossed, his expression grim. "She always said she'd die on stage," Felix muttered. "I just didn't think she meant it literally." Poirot watched him for a moment. "You argued with her recently?" "She was planning to shut the production down. Said it was her farewell in all things. No warning, no refund policy, nothing. It would have ruined me." "Why the sudden change of heart?" Felix hesitated. "She wanted out of theatre, out of this world maybe. I don't know." Poirot leaned forward. "Did you know she was writing a memoir? One that mentioned debts and betrayal?" Felix looked away. "I heard rumours. She said she'd put me in the final chapter. The man who took everything but gave nothing back. Typical Margot, always melodramatic." "And what time did you leave her dressing room yesterday?" "Shortly before 6, we argued. She threw a paperweight at me. I left before I said something I'd regret." Poirot made a note. "But she was alive when you left?" Felix's eyes narrowed. "Yes, very much so." The third interview was with Julian Lyle, her son. He was less composed. He sat hunched forward, his fingers tapping against his knees, his voice low. "She never wanted to be a mother," Julian said flatly. "She had me before she was famous, and I was her greatest inconvenience." "You came to see her before the show?" "I wanted closure," he said. "She sent me away when I was 12, said I was too sensitive, too weak. I grew up in a school for difficult boys. I saw her name in the papers, winning awards, traveling the world. She never wrote back." Poirot's expression softened slightly. "Did you speak to her yesterday?" Julian shook his head. No, I arrived just before 6. Her door was locked. I waited a few minutes, but she never opened. I assumed she was ignoring me. Again? Poirot watched him. Do you know what she was planning to write about you? Julian met his gaze. No, but I suspect it would have been cruel. Poirot gave a small nod, then stood. Merci, monsieur. That will be all for now. By midday, Poirot had returned to his hotel room, where he laid out his observations on paper. A pattern was beginning to form, though its edges were still clouded. Margot Lyle had been a woman with a past, a glamorous, ruthless past, and in her final days she had begun unmasking the people around her. Victor Dane, director, former lover, afraid of exposure. Felix Stroud, ex-husband, financially entangled. Julian Lyle, estranged son, angry, abandoned. And there was still one more name on the list, A.W. Andrew Wexley. But why? Poirot leaned back in his chair, fingers pressed together. Outside, the streets of Manhattan thrummed with noise, but within, the little grey cells were quiet and alert. There are more secrets still, he whispered. And I must look not only at who had motive, but who had access. Chapter 4. Smoke and Mirrors. A soft fog hung over Manhattan by evening, casting a silvery veil over the theatre district as Hercule Poirot returned to the Grand Orpheum. Despite its elegant facade, the building now resembled a grand illusion, still beautiful, but hollowed out by tragedy. Inside, Poirot found the stage dimly lit and near empty. A solitary spotlight flickered over a painted Grecian column from Antigone's Lament. Gwen Blake stood in the center, practicing a monologue to the dark. He observed silently for a moment how her hands shook as she delivered the lines. Her voice was steady, but her nerves betrayed her. When she finally noticed him, she froze. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly, stepping out of the light. I didn't see you. You speak well, Poirot replied with a gentle smile. You will be a fine Antigone, mademoiselle, if the play continues. She laughed bitterly. The understudy finally gets her chance. At what cost? Poirot walked slowly toward her. I have found that guilt often manifests not in words but in tremors. Gwen's breath caught. I didn't kill her. Poirot held up a hand. I do not accuse. But you saw something, did you not? Something you've not yet shared. Gwen hesitated, then sat down on the edge of the stage. She was afraid, she said. Margot told me the mirror in her dressing room was cursed. She swore she saw a face that wasn't hers, staring back one night, smiling at her. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A metaphor, perhaps? She meant it literally, Gwen said. The next day, she had the antique mirror replaced, ordered a new one installed herself. She said the old one was too haunted. Poirot nodded slowly. Tell me, did you enter her dressing room at any time yesterday? She looked up, startled. No, well, only for a second. I found her scarf lying by the costume rack, and I knocked on her door to return it. She didn't answer. I opened the door just enough to leave it inside. That was it. At what time? Around 6:10. And what did you see? Gwen looked down. She was seated. Her back was to me. She didn't move. I assumed she was meditating or perhaps ignoring me. Poirot remained silent, then asked one final question. What color was the scarf? Red, Gwen whispered. It matched her lipstick. Poirot thanked her quietly and left her in the dimness. In the prop room, the scent of sawdust and paint hung heavy in the air. Boxes marked graveyard scene, spears and fire effect lined the shelves. Poirot found Alvin, the prop master, carefully adjusting a fake laurel wreath. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, come to see how the magic's made? Magic? Yes, Poirot said. Or perhaps misdirection? Alvin raised an eyebrow. Poirot walked slowly, trailing his fingers along the shelf edge. "Tell me, this mirror that Margot had replaced, do you still have it?" Alvin frowned. That old thing, heavy as sin, cracked at the edge too. She swore it made her look 40 years older, said it was watching her. "Do you still have it?" "I kept it in the workshop downstairs, might still be there." Poirot followed Alvin through a side door and down a narrow staircase into the underbelly of the theatre, a cavern of forgotten props and discarded illusions. In one corner stood the mirror. It was large, oval, framed in ornate brass. Dust clung to its surface. Poirot stepped in front of it and stared. He saw nothing but his own reflection, calm, neat, unshaken. Then he noticed something etched faintly into the back of the frame. L.M., June 1932. "L.M.?" he murmured. "Lydia Moss?" "Who?" Alvin asked. Poirot said nothing. He left the mirror untouched and climbed back to the ground floor. Backstage, Poirot found Clara Wexley in the costume room, absently sorting through gowns. "You're very devoted," Poirot said gently. "To Margot? I was told she was something of a role model to you." "She was more than that," Clara said without looking up. "She was a goddess. The stage bent around her. She never bowed to anyone." Poirot approached slowly. "And yet she confided in you, perhaps?" Clara's hands stilled. "Once, she said if she ever vanished, I was to tell no one. That disappearing was her final right. She said people only really listen once you've gone." "Strange advice for someone preparing a comeback performance," Poirot said. Clara turned, her expression unreadable. Margot was complicated. Poirot studied her. "Tell me, mademoiselle, did you move the ring?" Clara's eyes widened. "No, it was found in your handbag. I told the detective I found it on the floor under a rack of costumes. I didn't know what to do. I panicked. I didn't want them to think—" "You were involved," Poirot finished. "Yes. That is how many good people come to harm, but it interests me. The ring was not hidden in her room. It was discarded outside." Clara swallowed hard. "Then someone else must have taken it." "Perhaps," Poirot said softly. "Or perhaps someone wanted you to find it." At sundown, Poirot returned once more to the dressing room. He stood quietly, hands behind his back, eyes scanning the mirror, the carpet, the powder tray, the chair. Then he saw it. A faint set of footprints in the deep pile carpet, too large for Margot, leading behind the privacy screen, then looping around to the chair. But curiously, no second set returning. "Très curieux," he whispered. And near the edge of the dressing table, a soft smudge, almost invisible to the naked eye. Poirot leaned closer. He touched it lightly. Grease paint, stage makeup, theatrical blood. And then one final item beneath the vanity drawer. Something wedged there. He used his pocket comb to retrieve it. A matchbook from a bar in Hell's Kitchen. The Red Griffin. Poirot smiled faintly. A false death, a vanished time, a woman who saw ghosts in the mirror. He straightened his tie and his smile faded. No, not ghosts, shadows. Chapter 5. The Emerald Puzzle. Sunday morning brought a chill breeze to Manhattan, the kind that whispered of change. While church bells rang faintly in the distance, Hercule Poirot sat in the Wexleys' Upper East Side drawing room, stirring a single sugar cube into his espresso with quiet precision. Across from him, Clara Wexley sat pale and visibly trembling. "So," Poirot said gently, placing the cup on its saucer, "let us speak of the ring." Clara didn't meet his eyes. "You told the police you found it under the costume rack. Why not hand it in immediately?" "I panicked," she said. "It was instinct. I know how it looks." Poirot gave a small nod. Indeed, especially since several people saw Margot wearing it just before her death. Clara's fingers knotted in her lap. I didn't kill her. I do not believe you did, Poirot replied smoothly. But someone wished to plant suspicion, and they chose you. She looked up sharply. Why me? Because of your admiration for Margot, because you were near the dressing rooms, and because you were close enough to her to know where she kept the ring when she removed it. Clara's breath caught. How did you know that? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Because I asked myself, why steal a ring unless it has meaning, and why discard it? The thief did not want the ring. They wanted what it symbolized, accusation. Clara leaned back. So, they took it to frame me. Poirot stood and began pacing slowly. Or to create confusion. Distraction is the oldest magician's trick. Later that afternoon, Poirot returned to the Grand Orpheum. Detective Hardwick met him at the backstage entrance, gruff and impatient. We're going in circles, Poirot. We've got no prints, no sign of forced entry, and the coroner says the time of death was between 6 and 7. Poirot tapped his temple. And the lipstick? Still testing. No poison detected in it, or on the champagne glass. So much for your poisoning theory. Poirot smiled thinly. We must not mistake lack of evidence for lack of method. He turned toward the prop department once more. There, buried behind stacked crates, was the costume rack where Clara claimed to have found the ring. Poirot bent and examined the floor beneath it, dusty, undisturbed, except for a scuffed heel mark and, yes, a tiny green thread clinging to the leg of the rack. Emerald green, he murmured. Same as the coat Clara wore. But the rack was at the far end of the corridor, near the side stage entrance. He stood and traced the route backward, stage left, toward the hallway outside Margot's dressing room. As he turned the corner, he stopped suddenly. There, on a narrow table beside the costume manager's office, lay a small discarded item, a rubber glove, powdered, size medium, smudged with grease paint. Poirot retrieved it carefully and held it up to the light. One glove, he said, not two. Back in the green room, Poirot summoned Victor Dane once more. The director looked worn, his silver-streaked hair unruly, his blazer rumpled. I hear you've been busy, Victor said dryly. Found any clues in the popcorn machine? Poirot smiled faintly. Only in the shadows, monsieur. Victor lit a cigarette with a shaking hand. Poirot observed the tremor. You were not truthful about your whereabouts during Margot's final hour, Poirot said. Several stagehands report you disappeared from rehearsal between 6 and 6:45. Victor exhaled sharply. I was in the upper lighting booth, alone. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Convenient. Victor's eyes narrowed. You think I killed her? I think you feared exposure. Margot planned to release her memoir, and your name, your real name, was on her list. Victor froze. My real... Poirot opened a notebook and flipped to a page. Victor Dane is not your birth name. You were once known as Louis Murrell, were you not? Victor's cigarette dropped to the floor. That was, decades ago. You were involved in a scandal in 1932, Poirot continued, after a young actress named Lydia Moss died during a touring production. Overdose. Officially. But rumors swirled. You disappeared from the London scene shortly after. Victor ran a hand through his hair. You don't understand. Margot promised never to speak of it, but last week she said she'd changed her mind, said the world deserved the truth. And you could not risk that truth, Poirot said quietly. Victor didn't reply. Poirot leaned forward. Tell me, what became of the mirror she replaced? Victor hesitated. I had it moved to the workshop. It unnerved her. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Or it reminded her of Lydia, of the past. of you." As the day waned, Poirot visited Andrew Wexley at his private residence. The financier greeted him in his study, surrounded by books and brandy decanters. Poirot wasted no time. "Margot Lyle's death is entangled with more than theatre politics. It reaches into personal affairs, and yours, monsieur, are not untouched." Wexley stiffened. "Meaning?" "Meaning that you and Margot were lovers once, in 1928, before she married Felix." Wexley sighed. "Briefly, it was nothing." "Perhaps to you," Poirot said, "but not to Margot, and certainly not to Clara, your daughter." Wexley frowned. "Clara Dorder. She idolized her." Poirot stepped forward. "Because Clara is Margot's daughter, isn't she?" Wexley didn't answer for a long moment. Then, "Yes." Poirot nodded. "And Margot refused to acknowledge her?" "She said it would ruin her image. The glamorous, untouchable star couldn't be burdened with a child born out of scandal." "So Clara grew up believing in a lie," Poirot said quietly. "And yet she remained loyal." Wexley poured himself a drink with shaking hands. "If Clara found out Margot was going to destroy what little legacy she had left," Poirot turned, "then she may have tried to stop it." That night, Poirot sat in his hotel room, reviewing his notes. A web was forming, knotted and tangled, a missing ring discarded deliberately, a mirror replaced after a vision, a matchbook found under Margot's vanity from the Red Griffin, a lost identity, Victor's true name, and past, a daughter denied and yet fiercely devoted. Then came the final clue, an envelope delivered to his room, no name, just a photograph inside, Margot and Lydia Moss, 1932, and standing beside them, a man half in shadow, Victor Dane, or rather Lewis Murrell. Poirot smiled grimly. "The curtain," he whispered, "is beginning to rise. Chapter 6. False Applause." By Monday afternoon, the Grand Orpheum was in rehearsals once again, though not for Antigone's lament. This time, Hercule Poirot was directing the scene. The theatre was dim but alive. Poirot had instructed the stagehands to resume normal rehearsal activity, and under the pretext of postponing closure, the suspects were invited back to the stage. But Poirot wasn't interested in theatre tonight. He was interested in behaviour. From the shadows of the empty box seats, Poirot watched. Victor Dane gave mechanical stage notes while Gwen Blake stumbled over her lines. Felix Stroud paced near the curtains. Clara sat in the front row chewing her lip. Julian Lyle lingered in the wings, arms folded. Andrew Wexley stood quietly to one side, expressionless. At precisely 4:55 p.m., Poirot signalled the stage manager. With a flick of a switch, the theatre was plunged into darkness. Gasps echoed. A shout, "What's going on?" In the darkness, movement, hurried, uneven. When the lights returned, just 15 seconds later, the stage was frozen, but not in the positions they had occupied. Poirot stepped forward slowly. "Curious, isn't it?" he said, loud enough to reach all ears. "How everyone reacted." Julian looked up, confused. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Poirot replied smoothly. "And everything. A simple test. No threat, no announcement, only the removal of light." He turned to Gwen. "Mademoiselle, you ran. Why?" I don't know. I panicked." "To where?" "The prop room." Poirot nodded. "Clara, you screamed." She flushed. "It startled me." "And Victor?" Victor said nothing. "You moved behind the curtain," Poirot said softly. "I saw your silhouette." Victor's brow twitched. "Coincidence?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, smiling faintly. "And yet, I planted a lie in the dark, that the police had discovered fingerprints on the broken clock in Margot's room. I wanted to see who would react." No one spoke. Poirot's gaze scanned them. "Tomorrow morning, those prints will be analysed. I wonder, who will be the first to try and leave New York tonight?" Poirot didn't have to wait long. At 8:15 p.m., he received a call from the hotel concierge. Gwen Blake had checked out early and requested a late-night train to Boston. He met her at Grand Central just as she reached the platform. "Going somewhere, mademoiselle?" he asked, quietly stepping beside her. Gwen startled. Her suitcase clattered to the floor. I'm visiting family." Poirot picked up the case and held it gently. "It is always the innocent who flee first." "I didn't kill her," Gwen said, eyes brimming. "But I saw something. I wasn't supposed to be there. I knocked. The door wasn't latched. I pushed it open." "What time?" 6:20, maybe. She was slumped in the chair already. Her hand was limp. I thought she was asleep. But then I saw her eyes. Poirot's voice softened. "And you said nothing?" "I was scared. No one would believe me. I was just the understudy. If they knew I found her first, they'd think I did it. Yet by saying nothing, you allowed the story of suicide to flourish." Gwen nodded miserably. "When I saw the mirror, I knew she didn't write that." "Because it was written with the left hand?" Poirot asked. "No," Gwen whispered. "Because Margot hated that quote. She said it was theatrical fluff. She would never use it." Poirot stared at her for a moment. Then he placed the suitcase down. "You must return with me," he said. "It is no longer just a case of murder. It is a matter of performance and justice." By midnight, Poirot sat alone in the orchestra pit, listening to the echo of his thoughts in the stillness of the theatre. He laid his clues out like a script in 3 acts. Act 1. The victim dies in a locked room. The scene is composed. Mirror, lipstick, ring, missing, champagne, untouched. Act 2. Secret surface, memoirs, scandals, old identities, Victor's dark past, Clara's hidden parentage, Wexley's shame. Act 3. Panic. Guilt revealed not by confession, but by instinct. But something still felt missing, a final piece. He took out the matchbook again, the Red Griffin, a dive bar in Hell's Kitchen. Margot, elegant and fading, had no reason to go there, but someone else did. Poirot visited the bar at dawn. Inside, the bartender rubbed sleep from his eyes. "Ever seen this woman?" Poirot slid over a picture of Margot. The bartender nodded. "Came in last week, met someone in the booth, heated conversation." "Describe him." "Older man, slick hair, British accent, wore gloves the whole time, said his name was Dane." Poirot's mouth tightened. "Merci." At 10 a.m., Poirot returned to the Grand Orpheum and requested that everyone gather on stage. Gwen, Felix, Victor, Clara, Julian, Wexley. He stood in the center beneath the full glow of the chandelier. "You have all been part of a performance," he began, "but it is not Antigone's lament. It is the drama of Margot Lyle's death." He turned slowly, his voice steady. "She did not take her own life. She was murdered, and her death staged to mimic melodrama." Gasps rippled through the group. Poirot raised a hand. The lipstick was applied by someone who misunderstood her. The mirror replaced days earlier, not broken in panic, but smashed to set a false time of death. The ring removed not for gain, but to cast blame. And above all, the killer made one mistake. Margot had recorded the meeting. He produced a small wire recorder, recovered from beneath the vanity drawer where Margot had tucked it days earlier, fearing for her safety. He pressed play. A muffled voice, female, nervous. "If you do this, I'll destroy you." A man replies, "You won't ruin me again, Margot. This is your final bow." Poirot stopped the tape. The voice was unmistakable. Victor Dane, or rather, Louis Merle. Victor stood frozen. Poirot turned to the others. "You will all have your answers soon, but the mystery, c'est fini." Chapter 7. All the world's a stage. The lights of the Grand Orpheum had never seemed so cold. At Poirot's request, The theatre's great drawing room, usually reserved for elite patrons, had been converted into a quiet space for revelation. Thick curtains muted the morning light, and the grand chandelier above cast a soft golden glow over the mahogany table where everyone now sat. Felix Stroud, hunched and bitter. Gwen Blake, pale and exhausted. Julian Lyle, arms folded tightly. Clara Wexley, her expression unreadable. Andrew Wexley, his face a mixture of guilt and concern. And at the end of the table, Victor Dane, stone-faced. Poirot stood calmly at the head, hands folded. "I thank you all for coming," he said, his tone measured. "As you know, Margot Lyle's death was first believed to be suicide, then perhaps a tragic accident. But I am here to tell you it was neither." He walked slowly, deliberately, his voice echoing gently off the walls. Margot was murdered, and like any great performance, her death was choreographed, a production staged by a mind well versed in deception. Felix scoffed. "You still haven't proved that." Poirot smiled. "But I will. Permit me to walk you through the final act." He turned to the others. Margot knew someone wanted to silence her. She was writing a memoir, a manuscript that would have exposed secrets, scandals, and crimes. Poirot took out the folded sheet recovered from Margot's script binder and placed it on the table. Here are the initials, 4 names, each marked with the sin she believed they committed against her. He pointed to each in turn. VD, Victor Dane, or rather Lewis Murrell, a man with a dark past. You were involved in the death of Lydia Moss, a young actress under suspicious circumstances in 1932. Victor's jaw clenched. "She was Margot's friend," Poirot continued. "Margot kept that truth hidden until now. When she threatened to expose you, you panicked." Victor stood abruptly. "There's no proof of that." Poirot smiled. "There is. A matchbook from the Red Griffin, where you met Margot last week. Witnesses confirm you were agitated. You wore gloves, perhaps to avoid fingerprints." He stepped forward. "You knew her habits. You had access to the theatre. You stole a powdered stage glove, applied the lipstick with your left hand, and wrote a message you thought was clever. But you got the quote wrong." Margot hated that line. Victor's voice trembled. "She said she would destroy my life." "And so you destroyed hers," Poirot said calmly. "You used theatrical poison from the props department, a neurotoxin delivered via contaminated lipstick, fast, efficient, no odor, no taste." The others gasped. Poirot turned to Hardwick, who had just entered with a brown envelope. "The lab confirms traces of prop-grade belladonna compound in the lipstick tube, not traceable in a standard autopsy unless one suspects it." Victor backed toward the wall. "You can't prove I applied it." Poirot raised a finger. "No, and yet your voice is on the recording. Margot hid a wire recorder under her vanity drawer, fearing she would be attacked." He played the audio again. The unmistakable voice rang out. "You won't ruin me again, Margot. This is your final bow." Victor's legs gave way. He sank into a chair, face ashen. "Yes," Poirot said gently. "That was your final performance, and unlike Margot's, it ends in disgrace." Poirot turned to the others. "But let us not forget, others here kept secrets as well." He looked at Clara. "You, mademoiselle, were not just her admirer. You are her daughter, the product of a secret affair between Margot and Andrew Wexley." Gasps swept the room. Clara's hands trembled. "I didn't know until recently," she whispered. "I found a letter, hidden in my father's desk. When I confronted Margot, she denied it, said I was a shadow to her light." "And yet you stayed loyal," Poirot said kindly. "You found her ring and tried to protect her legacy, even when it placed you under suspicion." Poirot moved to Julian, who looked up, eyes glassy. "You came to confront a mother who abandoned you, But you did not harm her. You merely wanted recognition, as did Clara and Gwen and all of you." He sighed. In the end, Margot was not just a victim of murder, but of memory. She cast herself as heroine in her own tragedy, forgetting that real lives don't always follow scripts. He looked around the table one last time. But for Hercule Poirot, the script is always complete. Victor was arrested that same hour. As officers led him away, he muttered something under his breath, words that Poirot would recall later with interest. "She was the better actor. I only gave her the ending she deserved." Back on stage, the Grand Orpheum returned to silence. The curtains hung still, and no spotlight shone. Poirot stood alone in the orchestra pit, gazing at the stage one last time. Andrew Wexley approached quietly. "You've solved it, as always," Wexley said. "But at what cost?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Then softly, "The stage hides many sins, mon ami, but none remain hidden forever." Chapter 8. Poirot's Final Bow. The press would call it the tragedy of Broadway's brightest, and for weeks afterward, Margot Lyle's face adorned every paper in New York. The New York Herald dubbed Poirot the man who staged the truth, while the Times ran a portrait sketch of him beside a quote from Sophocles. But Hercule Poirot, as always, avoided the noise. Instead, he sat by the hotel window with his valise packed, brushing a speck of lint from his perfectly pressed trousers. His gaze was fixed not on the headlines, but on the city below, restless, glittering, indifferent. There was a knock at the door. "Entrez," he said, without rising. Clara Wexley stepped in, carrying a small envelope. She looked younger now, somehow, without the heavy makeup and emerald coat, just a plain blue dress and her hair tied back. "I came to thank you," she said quietly, "and to ask a question." Poirot gestured to the chair. "Please." She sat, eyes flickering to the small leather case on the table. "Was she ever going to tell me?" Clara asked. "That she was my mother?" Poirot paused, then reached into his jacket pocket and produced a final item. A letter, folded and sealed, Margot's handwriting. "I found this tucked in the lining of her dressing room chair," he said. "She never sent it. Perhaps she couldn't, but I think it was meant for you." Clara took it with trembling hands. As she opened it, a single tear rolled down her cheek. Poirot turned to the window, giving her privacy. "She wrote that she was proud of you," Clara whispered, "that she was scared of ruining your life the way she ruined her own." Poirot nodded. "A woman of stage and strength, but even stars, mademoiselle, cast shadows." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then Clara stood. "What will you do now?" Poirot smiled softly. "I will return to London. There is a case involving the disappearance of a parrot in Hampstead. It may prove surprisingly complex." She gave a faint laugh. "Thank you." When she left, Poirot walked to the mirror, straightened his tie and adjusted his cuffs. "Margot Lyle," he said to his reflection, "you took your final bow, but the stage never forgets." Later that afternoon, Poirot visited the Red Griffin one last time. Not for drinks, but for closure. He slipped into the same booth where Margot and Victor had met. The seat was torn. A single cigarette burn marked the corner of the table. He turned over the matchbook again. Inside, written in faint pencil, he now noticed two numbers, 7 and 42. 6:42, Poirot murmured. The time on the broken clock, not random at all. He ordered nothing, just sat thinking. Time of death staged, ring planted, mirror replaced, and all of it done by a man who had once watched his entire career crumble and vowed it would never happen again. But Poirot knew. It always does. On his final evening in New York, Poirot took a quiet walk past the Grand Orpheum. The marquee had gone dark. A single maintenance man was peeling down the final letters from Antigone's lament. Poirot tipped his hat and continued on. As he reached the end of the block, he paused at a florist's cart and selected a single white rose. At a nearby theatre statue, Margot Lyle in her prime, arms raised in triumph, he laid the flower at her bronze feet. "Au revoir, madame," he whispered. "You played your part." And though the truth came late, it was still heard. He turned, coat fluttering in the autumn wind, and walked into the glow of a waiting cab.